I'm Sister Agnes, used to be Clare, Theo, and I'm a Dominican sister from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I went to Beaver Island on 1940. It was my first task as principal of a public school there, and I was very frightened about it. Sister Leonora brought me over, and Sister Leonora insisted on calling me Mother Agnes, because that was the way she always talked about the superiors of schools or the principals of schools as Mother. And so to tease me, she always called me Mother Agnes, which I never did like. But Sister Leonora was quite a tease when she was a tease. She was an islander herself, Gallagher from there. Sister Leonora and Sister Alexander had been my teacher in high school, so she felt that she knew me. So in 1940, I was sent to Beaver Island. I had taught in high school for a number of years previous to that, and it was going to be quite a different situation to have 4 grades in a high school and only one other teacher. I didn't know how it was going to work out, but we had to decide at that time who would teach what and how we would alternate classes so that we get all of our classes in there. So that was quite a situation. Plus that I was taking courses at Central Michigan, and they said they would help me in any possible way, because somehow or other they had always kind of considered Beaver Island as a part of their territory or whatever. So I was always very close to the Central Michigan situation, and they would help me at any time. So that's how I got to Beaver Island in 1940. Fresh as it would be in the principalship, and very fearful of what the Beaver Islanders might think of a city girl.
Mm-hmm. And you showed up in August of that year, I think.
Yes, we usually got our assignments in August, and I got mine on August the 15th, as usual. And then immediately had to pack up and go to Beaver Island. I'd known about Beaver Island because Dominican Sisters had been in Beaver Island since the 1890s, I think, one of the earliest places there that we had ever had. In fact, the priest who had assigned there said he would only go if there were some sisters who went also. And so he begged the sisters, Dominican sisters, who were then out of New York, there in headquarters in Traverse City. He invited them to come along, and so 2 or 3 of the sisters, I don't remember how many, were sent to Beaver Island, and we had been there until just of late years.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any of those original nuns that were on the island in 1899? There was Sister Clementine and Sister Genevieve.
Oh yes, I've known all of them at one time or the other there, and I'd heard about Beaver Island all that time. In fact, when I was a very young sister, not even professed yet, I was sent to Beaver Island to take a Sister Leo's place there for a few months. Sister Leo was ill. It was just the year before she died, and she was ill, and I was sent to help take some of her courses. And I recall at that time that the Father Gallagher, Monsignor Gallagher,
yes,
was in the high school there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know them very long because I was just there for a couple of, maybe a month or so, just to finish up the year for Sister Leo, because she couldn't make it to the island. So that was my first opportunity to be at the island. So when I was sent there in 1940, I at least knew what the island was all about.
Mm-hmm. What was your first impression of the harbor when you sailed into it on the Mary Margaret?
You know, the first time I went there, I can't even remember coming in as a harbor. I was too excited about seeing all the people standing around there, because that was a different situation. You go down, it just seems like hundreds of people were standing waiting for the boat to come in, and I wonder what they're all looking for. Yeah. More of a questioning, what's this all about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you taught high school.
I've always taught high school.
And you taught it in a room in what is now the parish hall.
Oh yes, yeah. that was it. There was a single room, and the rest of the high school, there were about, I would say, average of 25 students there, and so half of the high school was in the parish hall part of it there, and the other half was up at the hill, and a room up at the in the elementary school, there's one little room that, and Sister Lois had that at the time there, so she taught the other part of the high school. And as I say, we had to plan our classes very carefully so that in 4 years they got all of the subjects they should have in high school, and that was quite a chore to get those. So they would change over and do that. But we managed very well, and many of our students went on to college or were successful, whatever. Some of them went on for nursing, but all seemed to be very satisfied. Got good marks wherever they did go.
Did you teach the junior and senior class, or the freshman?
I taught whatever was needed.
Okay, so when you say you and Sister Lois,
yes, it depended on what we were able to do. She was very good in typing. I was not that good in typing, but I was good in math and history and English, and so we kind of divided on what we knew and not what the grades were.
Mm-hmm. And who were some of the other sisters there with you at that time?
Sister Gilbert had the 7th and 8th grade. Sister Leah, or Thea, both of them were there. I think it was Leah who was there at that time. There were 5 of us teaching school. I think 4 of us were downtown, and one was at Sunnyside, and the other one was a housekeeper at the convent. So there were 6 of us all together there.
And you all lived at the convent?
We all lived at the convent. And of course, the different part of that too is that the school was a couple of miles from the convent, and usually the convent is next to the schools, and it was the opposite way around. So we had to either be good walkers or drivers, or wait for each other to get back and forth. But many of us learned to drive while we were there. I was one of those who learned how to drive going back and forth to school. We'd take our turns driving.
There must have been times when the snow wouldn't allow you even to get into.
Well, there was one time we had such a snowstorm that nobody could go downtown. All the students could go to school, but no teachers could get into school. So it was a whole week before we were able to make it downtown, and then they got horses and sleighs out, and the farmers took us downtown with horse and sleigh. Then we had to rent a room downtown and stay there for a week until the roads cleared out and we could get the sleighs back on the road again.
Where would you rent?
I think it was a Lafreniere's home, about a block away from the school there. I think it was there upstairs that we rented a place for 3 or 4 of us, whatever it was there, about 4 of us.
There's a story in the annals from the island of one of the nuns, Sister Vincent Mary, and she used snowshoes on occasion.
Yeah, she went to Sunnyside. That was quite common. See, Sunnyside was just across the field from the convent there, and so when they didn't drive, we didn't have a car for them to go, so they either had to walk and or get a ride there. Mr. Rickskers used to sometimes take them over, but if they didn't, they all learned to use snowshoes, and when it was snowing, they would get their snowshoes out and learn how to walk across to Sunnyside. That was always a good story.
So the mission there was a little more demanding than the average assignment.
Very different, I would say, rather than demanding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What was the convent like? What was the building like that you lived in?
We had a very comfortable convent, in the sense that I remember it was warm. We had a furnace in the basement. We had to have our wood cut out in the lined up for us there. And our housekeeper when I was there was a Sister Agnes Dominic, and she was from Canada, and she knew all about winters in Canada. She knew how to cook. She knew how to handle meat situations. And I say that because I recall one day she said to me, "It's time to get the meat for winter," and I didn't know what that meant. So I said, "Well, go ahead and do what you have to do." And when I came home at night, here in the barn, in the shed, was a half a cow hanging up and a couple of pigs. What's all that about? And she was getting ready for the winter. And so I think she let those stay there until they froze. I think that's what happened. They would freeze out there. But then she would take parts of it and she gradually would cut it out and can it there. And she knew how to do that. Then she got chickens and it would cut those up and can them. I had never seen or heard of anything like that before, but she was very good. And then, of course, we were there during the war, and we had a few venison deer around.
Yeah.
And I recall that we're not supposed to kill the deer, but here we are on the island needing food, and so I can recall that we would ask, we wouldn't, but the men who did the shooting, hunting there, would find out where the guard was, the one who watches watches the animal, the shooting of the
game warden.
Game warden was, and he'd say, I'm going to be in the north of the island or south of the island. So he was going to be north, and they would go south, and would get their deer, and they would bring home a big slab of deer, or whatever it is, and we would have it until ready for the next one. But that's all the islanders had to do that. Of course, what could they do about it? We needed to have food.
Right.
And that's the way. So we never were without good food during the war. Mm-hmm.
And you also had what you called Uncle Tom's cabin, the sister's
cabin.
cabin.
Oh yeah, Sister Leonora's Uncle Tom lived just a little ways from the cabin. Before my time, the people wanted us to be near the water because they wanted the sisters to come there during the summertime there. And so Uncle Tom donated the land right near the water there. And I think the islanders helped put up the cabin, if I recall, there. So that was our cabin, and we always called it Uncle Tom's cabin there. And we would spend a lot of our weekends out there, or after school, go out fishing, or go out to swimming, I should say, and make our meals out there, or stay there weekends. And it was a good place for many of the Dominican sisters to come to for their summertime too. So that was a great place for summer resort.
And a number of them did come.
Always. The place was always filled.
Mm-hmm.
In spite of the mice. Because we had lots of mice around. We couldn't keep them out there. But we learned how to handle the mice, and we learned to be friends with them.
Yeah. So you were mentioning you learned to drive there.
Oh, yes.
And there was a story about an incident with a pig near Round Lake.
Well, they could tell lots of stories. See, the people at Beaver Island at that time, their biggest entertainment was to meet at the Shamrock at night and to tell stories of what happened. Well, of course, to tell the stories of what happened to the sisters was always the most interesting, because they all knew the sisters, and the sisters were from the city, most of them, and they didn't know the islanders, and so it was always a very interesting story there. And when anything happened to me, I'd come home and tell the stories. Wasn't used to the country, so I didn't know what was going on. And the story of the cow, I think the interesting part of that, the cow and the pig story, is that the day after the pig story, we took our turn driving into town there. It was my turn to drive into town. We usually went to the post office first and got letters or mailed letters there. And when I was driving into town, I saw people out on the porch, and they'd yell at their children, "Come in, come in, come in." And what are they yelling "come in" for? They were yelling, "A hit-and-run driver out there, hit-and-run driver out there." And so all the children would run into the house, and when I got to school, my bulletin board was emptied, and on it was a big picture of a hit-and-run driver and a big, long poem about how when this hit-and-run driver came in from the city, none of the children were free anymore. They were not safe. But that was a big sport of the Shamrock Inn at night, is something would happen, and as I say, especially to the sisters, and they would make a big joke out of it and have a lot of fun with it, and then tease us about it for the next month or so, because I kept getting when it was a pig story, I kept getting little Chinese pigs in the mail all the time. It was quite a good story, and still is a good story.
Yeah. And the island had just got electricity the year before you came, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was interesting, because I had no idea of something like that. The priest had a what do you call
a generator?
Generator there, and right across from us, and we had electricity, but electricity could go off at any time. We were never sure, but we had it, and the Coast Guard had it, and I think Gallagher's had it. We all had electricity on a telephone. It was the only 3 places on the island that had that. So we would have electricity at times, but we always had to have our kerosene lamps there also. But then that also meant that we had probably the only radio No, yes, it was a radio. We didn't have television. We had radios then at that time. We didn't have the only one. We had a good radio there, and if we wanted to know I have any news, we would get it from the radio and pass the word around to others because not many people had radios there. So we would get the news and we could pass it around and tell people what happened. So I can recall when World War II started, wasn't that on a Sunday? Yes. That Pearl Harbor was, and I can't recall why the people were out at the church, but for some reason the gathering was out at the church, which is a few miles away from the city, and we heard over the radio first that Pearl Harbor had been hit, and so we went out and told the people, and that was a big deal. So we had to bring the radio out and let everybody listen to what they could to hear what was going on. None of us were sure what it was all about there, but that's the way we first heard about World War II there.
You brought the radio outside of the convent?
I think we did. Mm-hmm.
And you called people, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But that was all very primitive and very new to us. It was, and we were ready to share anything we had.
Mm-hmm. How many students your first couple years there were you working on?
Well, in high school, we always had an average of about 25 there, more or less. It was in that line. In the grade schools, I don't know what there would be, but there are 8 grades there. They varied. And I had very little to do with the grade school. I usually just handled the high school.
That was an unusual situation. Public school staffed by nuns for a better part of a century.
Not at that time.
No.
It happened in quite a number of places there. This is one of the places that it was. In one of my first years there, the state superintendent of schools came over, and that was unusual. We've never before or since, I think, ever had a state superintendent of schools go to Beaver Island. But he came and he wanted to go to the school to see what it was all about there, and I was told that he would be there with a guest. And he came in about 1 o'clock and was going to take the boat out, I'm going to say at 2 o'clock. And I had told the children what to do and how to answer the questions that he would ask or something or like that. I said, instead of that, if you really want to do something, ask him some questions. He has all the answers about public schools and what's going on. And so the Islanders are willing to do something like that. And just as he got started and asked them a few questions, word came to us that the boat was another hour late. So he's going to stay 2 or 3 hours with us. But the Islanders are up to it. They simply got there and they began asking him questions, and they had the best time, and he was willing to get up and answer all their questions, and and he was surprised that they could ask questions and knew as much as they did about it. They could ask intelligent questions, and he was so surprised. And the man who was with him, I didn't know at the time, was Anspaugh, who later became the president of Central Michigan University there. And later on, he always kept telling me what a good time he had at the school at Beaver Island, how intelligent the students were there.
In the school, the students ranked pretty high in state scores as they do today.
Yes.
That was true then as well.
Well, I think that, for one thing, the parents made them study. They didn't have a lot of other distractions like other children do. I always have felt that they didn't, and the parents were insisting that they went to school to learn and made them study at home. And then the sisters made them study also. So we did have good students there. We always noticed that all the way through, that they were good students. There was always a few who didn't, but they kept up with what was going on. Practically everybody graduated. They had some very good times, but they enjoyed school. I never heard of children not liking school there. They appreciated going to school. Well, for one thing, nothing else for them to do.
Right.
And that was, yes, at school you were with your companions, and that was...
Did you have to accommodate family work situations sometimes with farming or fishing? Did you have to allow the students to be pulled out on occasion?
No, there wasn't much farming there, and fishing. The older people did the fishing when it came time for fishing in these little house boats, whatever you call it, the little places that they go out fishing. With the Indian children, it would go out very often, and Sister Gilbert knew about them, and she would go out and knock on their door and tell them to come into school and bring them into school for the day. But we never had any other accommodations to make. If they weren't in school, they were at home, and their parents knew where they were.
Right. Mm-hmm. Not long after you arrived in the summer of 1940, that fall there was a tremendous storm on Armistice Day.
Yes.
And what do you remember of that?
I remember it very well because I've been told so long by the boys that they had to go down and meet the boats there. That was the biggest interest in the whole school day, was when they watched the boat come in there. To begin with, before I answer your question, one of the boys, I think it was a Gillespie there, told me that he was a taxi driver and he had to meet the boat every day. And I, being green, not knowing about taxi drivers and Beaver Island, thought it was right. And so every day when he heard the boat whistle, he would get up and go up to meet the boat. And the kids would all kind of snicker, and I knew that something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was, till I found out that there was no such person as a taxi driver. And they thought they'd pulled a good one on me for a while. But when it came time for this, November, it was a November day for fishing there, that the men went out fishing, that the boys told me they had to go down and meet the boats, but that would not be in a school time. But they had to get, their job was to get the fish cheeks, and sell them, and they were sold at a very good price. So they told us to come down and watch it, because we would see the fishermen knee-high in fish, and I couldn't imagine seeing anybody knee-high in fish. So we went down there. It was a good storm that day, but we went down. We had to wait for the boats to come in because it was a very bad storm. But I can still remember standing there waiting and waiting and waiting for the boats to come in. When they did come in, and it was very dangerous there, the men were standing in knee-high boots and the fish around them, and they were cutting these cheeks out of the fish and throwing them in a big pail. And the boys went, high school boys went right to I don't know what the place was. It was, I would say a barn, but that wouldn't be it, but a shed or whatever it was. And they would take these cheeks and wash them in some way and put them in another bag, and then they would be sent right on to, I think, to Milwaukee there, to be sold at the market there. But then so we found out later that the storm was very bad. It got worse as the day went on there. I remember going home and having a difficult time with the whole thing there. But that was the last big fishing time they have. I don't think they had what they would call the big day for years until years afterwards. I don't know just what happened, but I know fishing was not the big thing for that day anymore. I think it's back again. I'm not sure.
Somewhat, but it never really returned to those levels in the 1930s and 40s.
And why would it have happened that so many?
Well, a combination of factors. Overfishing on one hand, and the state has begun to abandon its hatcheries program around that time. So there wasn't a lot of effort put into restocking the Great Lakes commercial fish. And the land-free eel, which was introduced
yes, I
accidentally
recall
in the Great
that.
Lakes in the 1930s, decimated the population. So those three things came together, and by the end of the 1940s, the fishing industry as we had known it was over, essentially.
But I do recall that we've always said that the best meal in the world would be a baked white fish or big fish there with the dressing in, and that's the best. You couldn't get a better meal anywhere than that. I suppose it's still very true, but except we don't get any of it around here anymore.
And you must have had some rough rides on the ferry boats going back and forth.
Tell me. The one thing I couldn't take it would be the rides on the boat. I always got sick there, so I just liked going back and forth very much. But a couple of the sisters didn't mind it at all. And I can recall one time the boat ride was so bad that they told the story. They would try to lie down in those little beds. They weren't beds. They were boards something or other they could lie on. And the boat would go back and forth. They didn't even have time to hit the floor. They would go from the bed to the wall, back again, back and forth. Never hit the floor. And they couldn't get up because the boat was so rocking so there. But we can tell many a story of different times that we have gone back and forth. I went over once with a lot of cattle. And I can remember the captain telling me the moment ahead of time, "Don't take those cattle today." She said, "I've got to take them today. It's my last day here and I've got to take the cattle." He said, "Well, you'll be responsible for them." And so he let the cattle go on the boat. And when he got out in the lake, the boat began to go back and forth. And they didn't even have time to tie the cattle down. And the cattle began to slide around on the floor. We couldn't even get upstairs because of the cattle. We got into a little tiny cabin that was there. And it was crowded in there, and here we are. We all started to say our prayers there because we were sure the boat wasn't going to go through. And they were out there trying to, I think they call it ride the animals, to get them to get down on their knees like that. And they're yelling and screaming out there at the animals, and we are saying some prayers. And the boat going back and forth. I never had such a time in my life as that ride back and forth. And when we got, I'll tell you, that woman heard it from everybody. But I think all the animals went out alive. But we've had many a strange ride on those boats.
During the war years, you said that you were pursuing a degree in administration. Is that right?
School administration.
And you worked for the community in terms of rationing sugar, is that right?
Oh, well, we were a public school, and all public schools had the rationing programs. They had to do all the rationing. So as a public school, we were given by the government. First we were checked, and we were given all of the tickets, the rationing tickets. And then after school hours and on Saturdays, I don't remember when it was, everybody on the island who got their tickets had to come to us. And we had it all set up so that they would go from table to table, and I don't know what they had to do, but they had to give us some reasons or something or other. And we distributed all the rationing tickets every week. It was a regular situation there.
How did the community adjust to that, to rationing, the early years?
Beaver Island never had too much of a problem with it. As I say, they had their own meat situation there, and they eat very frugally. Made their own things, and I don't recall that there were any big problems with rationing. Gas, but they didn't go very far anyway, so they didn't have that big problem there. Really, I don't recall. Shoes might have been one of the problems that they had, but they could exchange their tickets there, and I know many of them did with people on the mainland for give me this ticket and you give me your ticket, and that's the way.
Yeah.
But I don't recall any problems with the rationing. Even in giving out the tickets, there was no big problem. People just accepted what they had.
When you did things for recreation, did you ever go skating? Did the sisters ever try that out?
We were well known for skating because we had long white habits on. And all of us skated. We were all young sisters there. And we skated, and I'm sure people can still tell you about seeing the sisters with their long white habits skating in the harbor down there. And then we also had some smaller ponds around our place there. But once I recall it was the ice froze just like glass. You know, if it froze fast, it would freeze like glass. And all of 6 of us, I think, went down and skated, and we had the habits on. People were taking pictures of us. And all of us could do some skating, whether it was good or not. We all could do some skating there, so we enjoyed the skating. We enjoyed all of the recreation there. We did a lot of fishing. I don't think we caught fish, but we did a lot of fishing there. We would do that. We would go out for picnics. We just had a glorious time. It was a wonderful picnic spot for all of us. And
where would you go? Where would you go fishing?
Well, there are a few little lakes around there. Don't ask me where they were now, but I know there were some lakes that we found the lakes, and we know where to go. Another interesting part of that was, where do we go? A couple of our sisters had come from the country and were used to medical herbs there. Their parents had used them. And I recall one particular time somebody was very sick, and we didn't always have a doctor on the island, but he came over and his wife was very, very ill. She needed to have something or other, and could we find something? And I think it was Sister Gilbert and Sister Vincent Mary, both of them knew something about it, and they said, well, yes, we know. My mother used to use such and such a herb, and I know where it is at the end of the island. And this was late afternoon there. And he said, oh, I'll give anything if you go and get it, because my wife is so sick. So they said, all right, we'll go. So they went out in the evening, way to the end of the island. They finally found what they were looking for, came back and made some tea and gave it to the woman. She recovered, and they always said, you know, but that was, we did what farmers who knew how to handle things would do, and we had enough people there who knew about it. I wouldn't know anything about it, but they knew.
Yeah. You were called upon from time to time to step in.
Oh, to step in and do almost anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who was the priest at the time you reached the island in 1940?
Well, Father Fabian was there. He was a Franciscan priest, and then he left, and the diocesan priest came in. Father Brannigan was a diocesan priest that was there, and Brannigan later came to this way, and we were with him when he died, and so on, because he always loved the island.
Do you remember some of the neighbors around the church hill there from those years?
Oh. Well, the Ritzkers lived close to us. Johnny Ritzkers and his two boys. They lived, and Schmitz lived over on another corner there. They were a German family. The place, I can't think of a name right now, but they now have a airport in their backyard. Where's there an airport? Right close to the convent, the old convent.
Yes, there is. It's Island Airways, but at that time it was owned by a Gallagher family, I think.
Was it a Gallagher family?
No, Big Owen.
Big Owen, yeah, Big Owen.
Big Owen.
That was something that always interested us, that the way they got names there. But that was an Irish custom, so we learned. Johnny and Mary would be the son of John and Mary, but they never used their last names. It was John somebody and Mary somebody, and so he used to be the son of John and Mary there. Mm-hmm.
And the nuns were involved in things like putting on the Christmas bazaar and Halloween gatherings.
We did a lot of that. Because I was there during the war years, there was not a lot of activities going on. We had a movie once a week, and the parish showed the movie, and the sisters were the parish that showed the movie. They would take the movies downtown. I think it was maybe every Sunday afternoon. I'm not sure of that date. We would go down to the gym. Somebody would go down and would put the movie on, and I think they were free. I don't remember ever taking any money for them. But anyway, people would come in and watch the movies. As I told someone a while ago, Ben East had been there. Ben East was from the Grand Rapids Press, and he had taken the pictures of many of the islanders for the Saginaw News, and he sent us the film of it, and we showed it to them. And for many of the older people, they saw a movie for the first time, which they themselves not only saw a movie, but they themselves were in the movie. And they never got over talking about that. That was one of the things. And then the parish would have bazaars, and the sisters were noted for making candy to sell at the bazaars. We had to help with the parish because we were paid for it by, our salary came from the public school, but we lived in a convent, which belonged to the diocese there. And so we used to, for all the bazaars, and they worked for the bazaars and do what we could to help set them up and and it was a kind of a social affair too anytime you have a bazaar. So we did a lot of that kind of work, keeping the parish together there. And so that was quite a common situation.
Yeah.
But we talked about making candy and making a lot of things and selling things and getting things ready.
Who were some of the students that stand out in your memory from your years?
Well, right away I think of May Gallagher. I think of May Gallagher. It was Jim's daughter. I think.
Yes.
May was quite a leader, and one of the things that makes me think about her is that when it came to St. Patrick's Day, well, it was a public school, and I didn't think that they should, because of the public school, they should have a free day on St. Patrick's Day. That didn't go down with me there, and so I had said that I didn't think they should have a free day. So the first year I was there, I said, no free day, and the sister, oh, you've got to have it. I said, no, I can't see it. I can't do that in justice there. And so they finally agreed that, well, as long as you get together and you can count your students and so on, if you're there for part-time, you would have a free day. Well, the whole school was after me for that. And so I said, well, all right, then come down to church on St. Patrick's Day and let's meet at church. Because we lived 2 miles from the school. So you come down to church and we'll call a roll there and have. So the next, they all agreed to do this. Everybody agreed to that. The next day there was such a storm that nobody could get out of the house except Lawrence Malloy, Lawrence's older brother, Malloy, was the only one who he walked all the way down there. Nobody else could get out of the house. And of course, when I got it, we told you St. Patrick would give us a free day. So that was it for that day. So the next year, it was, well, I had to get on the free day because what else could you do? But, so they said, well, what happened? Something happened there. I said, if you sing, they wanted to sing, and May Gallagher wanted to lead the singing. They wanted to sing some Irish songs. And so little girl, oh, okay, if you want to sing, but you can't repeat any 2 songs. You have to keep on saying the song, a different song all the time. Oh, yeah, they would do that. And they sang probably 2 hours. I don't know where they must have made up the song. I wouldn't be surprised. But they kept on singing and singing and singing. May Gallagher led that. So she was one of the leaders, whatever it was, for something to do with it there. But May Gallagher and Roland McCann were 2 of the main leaders. And when anything happened, those 2 were always leading it there. They were older than Donald. It's about 2 years older for that. So, but they made their own fun. And we had our own good times there. And I think we had many more good times than probably we did in other schools because they know each other and just enjoyed each other.
Yeah, it was a very tight-knit community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You probably find that even today that that group are very close together.
Very much so. Mm-hmm. Do you remember Sister Veritas?
Oh yes, very well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was. I was there the first time with her, and then afterwards I knew her very well. She was from Mount Pleasant, and a very good, happy person.
Mm-hmm. And she taught there for quite a number of years.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think you have a list of all the sisters who taught there. Not there's another list of. If not, we'll give you one of every sister who ever taught on the island.
You went to High Island in the spring on an annual high school.
Not an annual one there. I liked history, and I'd heard about High Island, King Ben, Queen Mary there, and knew that the High Island was a part of their regime there, their property, and I always wanted to go there, so we always went somewhere for our spring picnic there. And this time it was High Island, and so a couple of fishermen took us over there. And to begin with, you have to walk in. You can't get a boat close to the island. You had to walk in, and then when you got there, all paths led to the center circle. Do you remember that? And to a church there. And so we got into that. We got into the center circle, and at that time, it rained while we were there, and the boys found a kettle, and picked up a kettle, and brought it into the old church, or just a frame of a church there, and they put some wood in it and built a fire, and we roasted our weenies inside the old church there. But then everything led to this church into a garden, a round garden, I recall, there. And so we had to experiment with that. It was a place, of course, where there was a penal colony is what it was there. And we learned all about the penal colony. There was nobody else there, a few wild horses there. We learned about that. And we had just a great time there. But I think it was on Garden Island. We went over there for a picnic. There was a shed there, and it was about ready to fall apart. And I can remember the boys saying, "Sister, we've got to rescue that shed. We can't leave it there. That's going to hurt somebody." Well, how were they going to rescue it? Well, they'd all stand on one side and give it a 1, 2, 3, go. So anyway, they did it and let it all go down so they wouldn't hurt any animals for that. And Garden Island has all the snakes around there, if you recall, too.
Yes.
A lot of snakes. You must have gone back and forth those places, too. But we had our try on each of these islands to see what they were like.
Who would take you there? Do you remember the boats?
No, fishermen's boats. All I knew is that they'd get their dads taking us in different little boats there.
Wasn't there an incident when the convent roof caught on fire when you were there and the high school boys put it out?
I have no recollection of it. If it was, I don't remember it at all. Could have happened. Maybe it was when I wasn't around, too.
Yeah.
But I think that the students at Beaver Island probably had a better time than a lot of students in other schools did. We brought over the first baseball team, too.
Really?
I would like to tell people about that. They don't seem to know that. That we had baseball. The field was north of McDonough's store.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were towards the... and I thought they ought to meet some other kids around. And so I got in touch with I probably was a school, a Catholic school, I'm not sure, on Charlevoix, and made the arrangement that those kids should come over to the island. And so the dads of the islanders got busy and cleaned up the field and got it all set up. And we had our first baseball game with the Charlevoix kids. And that was a great time because they'd never played with anybody else before. And so we had a baseball team, and after that, they went over to Charlevoix, and I don't know how long that kept up. They exchanged. Do they still do that, or?
They have an annual tournament every homecoming.
Oh, do they?
You know,
Well,
a lot of teams from Charlevoix come and play against the island teams. There's usually 1 or 2 island teams.
Oh, is that
They
right?
just
1 or
had
2?
another tournament this year, and the island lost, but they're outnumbered.
Well, the first ones are when we were there. The first time they did something like that. Mm-hmm. Because I believed in them being involved with others and things happening there. So that was, I always remember that, getting that field ready and how everybody helped out to get it ready.
Yeah.
To play another team. That was a big deal.
Did any of the nuns teach music in your years there?
You know, I can't recall that they not teach music as music. They taught singing, but no, I don't think so. Sister Gilbert and Sister Lois were the nearest 2 musicians that we had, and I recall at Christmas one time they had a choir. They would sing. I don't know who did play the organ, but they didn't. But this was a midnight mass at Christmas, and they had their flashlights with them, and all the candles were lit in church. And we had, the church had the electric lights, and just about midnight, all the lights went out in church, but the candles were all lit, and it was so beautiful that ever after that, the Islanders insisted that the midnight mass have only candles. But the sisters had their flashlights with them so they could continue with the singing. But we always laughed at that. The reason that they had no lights at Christmas time was because of tradition.
Yeah. Who do you remember from the community as adults? I mean, who stands out in your...
And
Where did you develop?
in working with adults,
Yeah.
you know, I don't ever recall working with adults. As much as I have worked with adults in my life, you'd think I might have started there, but I didn't. I don't think the adults ever, they were always too busy. Too many things at home. I don't remember them having any social life to talk about at all.
When you were there, you were working on a history of Beaver Island.
Mm-hmm.
And where did you get your source material? Where did you go for information when you were compiling that?
Well, I was going to Notre Dame at the time, and I remember going to we had to go to the old newspapers themselves. I remember going to the old newspapers at Notre Dame and finding what I could about Beaver Island, and finding out that the Franciscans from Petoskey, I don't know, the bishop was there at one time, and they had a big boat. They had a boat going over to Beaver Island at one Sunday there. It was a big picnic, as it were, and the boat was filled there, and they had an orchestra on the boat, and this was all in a newspaper that I found at Notre Dame. So the boat took this whole group from Petoskey to Beaver Island with the boat, with the newspaper, with the orchestra, and the bishop. And the bishop had a confirmation there, and then they came back the same day. But I got my material, much of my material, from newspapers there, and the library at Central Michigan didn't have a lot, but it had something there. And then where else I picked up. Our own archives had some things here.
You had planned to write a dissertation on Ireland.
Yes, we had to have so many. I had a dissertation, but then they changed the rules just before I finished that, and you could take another summer and get credits and not have to write a dissertation, so that's what I did. So I never finished it. But as I told you, Mark, one of the boys from here anyway, has written a dissertation on James Vegetron. I'm going to try to call him yet while you're here.
The church played a pretty large role in island life.
Very much so. I don't think the island would be what it was, what it is today if the church had not been there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty remote place, not a lot of resources.
Yes, it's interesting that it would have such a resident priest for so long, and the sisters being there at a school. Of course, the state rules say that if you don't have a high school, you have to send the children to a school and pay the room and board, and that would have cost quite a bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
They often debated that when they thought the school ought to close. They would have to still pay for the high school for those students to go over to Charlevoix. Mm-hmm.
So it was a combination of a couple of factors that led to public school being staffed by nuns for so long. Partly the low pay did not attract teachers from the mainland, and the remoteness and difficulty of getting back and forth were two major.
And the first priest who went there said he would only go if there were sisters went.
That's right,
And
Father Zugelder.
Yeah, and so they got the sisters, and then they stayed on. The sisters liked it, and that was it.
Almost 100 years teaching. The last two, one of who was here at Marywood, left in 1990 and 91, I think it was.
Who is here now?
Marie Eugene, Sister Marie Eugene, and Sister Mary Rock.
Oh yeah, they just left, but yeah, they were the last ones to leave.
So that was quite a stretch of time, really woven into the community.
Yeah, the sisters have done a great deal for Beaver Island.
And you had a lot of nuns that would visit.
Oh yes, that was it. They miss that now. Like that sister who was there yesterday.
Right.
She's surprised it was there. Their cousin, they all know Beaver Island. They regret so much that we don't have a school there, that they don't, a cabin there anyway. Yeah. That cabin was a very big attraction.
Right. Was Sunnyside still in operation? Sunnyside School still open when you arrived in 1940?
When I arrived, yes, yes. We had two sisters, different sisters there when I was there. Sister Leah and Sister Vincent Mary, and two different times.
But the Roosevelt School was not.
Had already closed.
Already closed.
Mm-hmm. But I knew the Gill fellow who was teacher there, because he had been at McCann, Giles McCann.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Did the classes ever combine at certain times? Like, did Sunnyside go downtown to McKinley, or did they ever?
Never until the school closed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had to have transportation, and that transportation would not be easy.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They didn't have cars that easily,
Mm-hmm.
and we were quite a few miles.
You were telling a story about driving into town with the nuns in the Chevy one day, and you would always stop to pick people up as they're on the road, and you picked up a young boy, local boy.
Oh, no, this was an older man who lived on the road on Kings Highway there. I knew where he lived. He lived with his brother there. And I was with some high school boys who were coming back from having put some trees in at the cabin. And we stopped to ask this man where he was going and if we could help him. He looked at us and he said he was going home. And I said, well, your home is the opposite way. And he said, well, how should I know? I haven't got a compass.
Who was that man, do you remember?
I don't recall his name, no.
And you mentioned the story about planting trees around the cabin and how the boys went down to Bessie McDonough's farm and got fish.
Oh, yes, that was, well, it was, the sisters who lived on the island were expected to keep up Uncle Tom's cabin, which is natural there. And so we had to keep it clean and caulk it and paint it and do all the things there ourselves there for it. And this time we wanted to put a kind of fence around it with trees. And so we decided the boys were always willing to do something if we would take care of them. So people like Don Cole and Bud McDonough and those fellows also, they'd go with us. And so we got the car, and I think maybe I was driving. I don't know. Anyway, we went down to the cabin, and we would get the lunch for them. And they went out and dug holes for the trees, and we got these little trees. You'd pick them up out in the woods, you know. There we got those trees, and so the boys dug their holes. And at noon we went out to get the boys, and no boys in sight. Now, where are the boys? And down to the Bessie McDonough's place were the boys coming back, each one with a big fish in his hand. And I didn't know what the fish were for. I had never seen anything like this. What are you doing? Well, how'd you get the fish? Well, they picked them up by the tails. They said at that time they could do that, at that time of the year. And so they said, we'll show your sister what we're doing. And so they got to each one had his own hole dug, and they dropped the fish in the hole, and they put the tree in and put the dirt on it, and they said, watch it grow. Yeah. And they're huge trees now, if they're still there. They're huge trees. It was the first time I'd seen trees being fed.
Why did you call that Uncle Tom's cabin?
Because Sister Leonora's Uncle Tom lived just about a quarter of a mile away, and he was the one, I think he donated the land for it. And so it was always Uncle Tom's house and Uncle Tom's cabin. Natural story.
The Islanders built the cabin as kind
I
of
think they did. I
reason.
think they all helped a group of, I don't know who headed it. It was before my time. It was a nice cabin.
Yeah. You were talking about having to educate the head of the local school board.
Well, Bud McDonough, or
Lloyd
McDonough.
Yeah.
Well, only in the sense, to educate him, only in the sense of what he could do and couldn't do, and what rights others had, and so on. When things would come up there, naturally, I mean, I would be on the board, I would be reporting to the board, and if things would come up, I could tell him what the law was, or like that, if he didn't know it. And he had been on the board for a long time, so, and he was very good to the sisters. You couldn't have ever asked for anybody better. In fact, that's some of the reason that the sisters stayed so long. You know, you wonder why they did. Because we didn't get much of a big salary. I mean, it might have been a public school, but they paid us very little salary. They didn't have the money, and the schools did not put much money in it. But we stayed there. The parish needed us, and we stayed. Mm-hmm.
You told us earlier about an incident involving an animal in your class.
About what?
An animal. A cow, I think it
A cow.
was.
A cow in the doorway?
Oh, well, that's the one that went in the Grand Rapids Press. That's the story there. I'll give you that tomorrow.
Okay.
But that was I taught in that school, in an auditorium there, the room at the end where the door is right like this right behind me there, and it looked right out into the lake. And I was only there a couple of weeks, and the door was wide open because it was a warm day there. And of course, people kind of stay under control when I'm there. And so the seniors are sitting in the back of the room studying, supposedly, and the freshmen were in the front of the room reading Treasure Island, and I was just listening and keeping control there. And I heard somebody at the door, and I thought it was one of these islanders, you know, and I'm brand new and a fresh city girl. And so I thought, well, what are they looking at? And I looked around, and I said, I can still feel what I said. Everything's under control. What are they looking at? They got the nerve of stopping at the door and looking in. Why don't they come in? Why don't they wrap it in the door? I'm not going to turn around, and I can still go through that. But I'm not going to turn around there because everything's under control. If they want to watch this city girl teach, okay. And so I stood there, you know, but I could see these seniors were just bent over with laughter, not making a sound. And something is very wrong, but I'm not going to turn around. I'm proud. But I felt the breath on the back, and I turned like this, and the cow was just about here. And all I could do was look at the cow, and all the cow could do was look at me and back up. And it backed right out the door. The seniors just rolled on the floor with laughter, and the freshmen just looked at what's going on.
You stared the cow down.
I stared the cow down. And then this Charles Honey, who does the paper there, he had interviewed me for about 4 hours, you know, just like you're doing, but at 4 different times there, he came to interview me because he was going to write an article. And I said, well, what are you going to write? You've got enough material here. 4 hours is a long time to be talking. And he said, I said, you know about everything about me now. What's your focus going to be? I don't know what the focus is going to be, but it's going to be something. And so when you get the article, you will see he put that article, that part in there too. But then the one he didn't put in, that the kids had more fun with, was we were going out to Roosevelt School area once, but only the choir could go out. Those who had been singing in a choir could go out. And in order to make that a very private affair and were present, you know, the others who didn't stay in the choir had to stay home. So I stayed home with those who were not in the choir. And Sister Lois and Gilbert, I think, took the group out with the choir. And this was the winter time, and the snow, you know, built up on each side of the road, only one-way traffic. Nobody's foolish enough to go out except the nuns were foolish enough to get out with a car, and I'm foolish enough to drive there. So I'm driving along, and I see these 2 pigs crossing the road. And what do? You know, the snowbanks on either side. I'm going to hit that pig. So I kind of slowed down a little bit. And I hit the pig. But I said to Sister Leah, who was beside me, look, did I kill him? Or she said, no, he got up and walked away. So I, well, fine, you know, so I kept right on going. And got down to where they met me with a horse and sleigh there, and we were parking our car and going over. And I said to the crowd that was there, I hit this pig, and Sister said and I kept right on going. I didn't kill him, he just got up and walked away. So they got hit and run driver. Well, that was a wrong thing to say to a group of high school kids, so they ticked it up. And of course, that night, what did they do at the tavern? They talked all about it. And that day, the father came along, and he said, he had a roller in his hand, and he said, does anybody here do any drawing? He said, I have something I need to draw. Well, he knew very well that Sister Lois was an artist, and I said, well, yes, and they're standing right, I went to the door, and they're standing right behind me. This is all very formal. He's never that formal. And he said, well, I need a picture drawn. And so he hauls out this picture of a nun at a car and the hit-and-run driver, which had been done somehow or other at the tavern there. They had gotten it and somebody had done this drawing, you know. And so here's this picture. Well, all right. You know what he was doing. Well, the next morning I went to school and my bulletin board is down, and the Pops lived on the island. I don't know if you knew the Pops there. And they had taken my bulletin board down and had filled it up with hit-and-run driver there, and had written a whole big poem about the hit-and-run driver and come to Beaver Island and nobody's safe anymore. And that's when I think I told you that the parents, and I was driving to school the next morning, the parents hauled the kids in off the roads, you know, hit-and-run drivers come and get off the road. But that was fun.
So they like to talk about you at the
Oh, they love to talk about me. I was. That's what they probably talk about, some of those things too. Probably more than I can remember, which is okay. If I can get a good laugh out of it, it's fine with me.
A lot of good memories from that time.
Yeah, there are. And you talk to most of our sisters, and they'll all say the same thing. There are a lot of good memories there. We enjoyed being on Beaver Island.
Did you ever run up against any of the old Celtic superstitions? Were they still in people's minds?
Like what?
Well, belief in fairies, for example.
No. The only thing that I can remember is when somebody died in the family, and I remember this because of Meg Gallagher, somebody died in her family that she couldn't go anywhere for a month or something like this. And